Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to a new session of the CRID webinars titled METAPORTALS today with architect SAMER EID, who was born in Lebanon and who has completed an architecture degree in the Lebanese Academy of Fine Arts, ALBA, winning the Shaderji Award winning project in 2001. He's an architect since 2002 and started his own firm, SAMER EID Architect, entering a number of competitions and winning a number of prizes. And he has a developing and growing reputation with a large set of atypical projects. He's an instructor since 2005 and the founder and the director of the ALBA experimental platform, through which he was actively exploring the cybernetic affiliation between natural system, emergent forms, and artificial intelligence, and publishing a number of articles in the field. He has also participated recently in the talks to reconstruct Beirut, all the way with teams from London and Beirut. That would be all from my side for now, Samer. I'm sure you have a lot more to offer to us today. And I would like to remind everyone who is attending today, if you do have questions, please type your question in the Q&A section or just send them to me privately in the chat, and I'll be directing your questions to Samer at the end of the session. Samer, that would be all from my side. So the stage is yours.
Thank you, Mohannad, George and Mohannad, and I'm really pleasured and honored to be in the webinar series. And I'd once more say that this is a long overdue for both of us, dear George. If I may add one important thought about you, George, I think that the Emirates gained a great talent like you, while Lebanon lost you, sadly. So,
you're too kind, thank you.
Quick intro. Thank you, George. So a quick intro about the topic of the day, as Mohannad mentioned, METAPORTALS. METAPORTALS was initially meant to take the form of an analog publication back in 2016, which has been aborted due to multiple reasons, then put to quarantine. Can you still hear me?
Yes, all is good.
Yeah, all right. So the day has finally come to be for it to be screened in virtual format, and I wouldn't definitely hide the fact that I'm more than thrilled about such a retrospective act. Before launching my fifth comment to our audience, not to forget to put your audio gear in view to have a fully immersive experience. So your headsets, everyone, please. All what is left for me is to be crossing fingers, not to have power cuts or internet laggings. Meanwhile, hope you'll enjoy the ride, and here we go. Sorry, I'll have to put my mic off. I forgot to put my mic off. 1 second.
No problem, no problem.
In the stories to follow, architecture will forego pursuing performance and assume the role of connotative multi-perceptive experiential narrative. Therefore, architecture is to be thought of as the association of concept and form, whilst simultaneously invoking various processes of shaping spaces. Metaportals encompass a plethora of alternate universes on the threshold between fact and fiction, objective and subjective, primordial and post-apocalyptic, natural and aesthetic, rational and supernatural. Drawing on the elusive signifiers of ghostly structures, oblivious voids, palimpsestuous sites, geometries and traces of remote memories, fantastic situations and devious conditions, each entry heralds an experimental protocol where form and structure, idea and matter morph into cinematic scripts and virtual prototypes. Trans-spatial narratives unfold into tripartite taxonomy is conveyed. O for Organicum, M for Machina, S for Spectrum.
In a congested urban landscape, the personal is analyzed and transfigured through an imaginative process to expose an alternate reality. Protruding from a residential facade, a balcony enclosed with glass bridges the interior of the apartment with the outside city environment. This platform is a common familial space, yet narrow in proportion. It seems cluttered. Oriented inwards, a couch faces a television on one side, aligned with a desk for work on the other side, and bookshelves above, all too domestic. This mundane hall is decorated with numerous pots of plants in attempt to render the space green like a garden invading a loggia. It is this process that the imagery emphasizes. Out of these receptacles, trailing wood-stemmed plants are ejected. With this violent act of liberation, that whirling trunks and thick vines rupture the enclosure, expanding and growing in density to become a lush outclosure. Spurting out from the source yet leaching on, this densifying entity hovers over the streets below, like a flying shrub, animating the mineral surrounding. A new vantage point is affirmed, from secret terrestrial to secrete the Elysian.
Sheets of print paper, pens and pencils, water bottles, electronic cables, plastic wraps, gum packs and other miscellaneous articles, are tucked together in a translucent block that looks like blood soap. A section representing the constituents of this brick of wax is reminiscent of X-ray baggage scans, where incompatible diverse objects are detected as a harmonic ensemble of shape and color. Following this logic, the mass is abstracted and inverted. This procedure exposes the different items, now reduced to acidulating surfaces, charged by interlocking appendices and spikes that pierce through these pieces and bind them together. These chiral entities are then flipped, manipulated and coupled. Adorned with a parasitic lattice structure, they become part of a biological combinatory system. The outwork mesh acts as a skin-enveloping scar tissue, allowing the multiple organizations to expand. Detailed views of the augmented incorporations suggest floating scattered lumps that one can only spur through, like bacteria.
In this architectural experiment, molten metal is transfixed by concentrated poured concrete. Sectioning through this block reveals crevices formed by clumps of fluid matter folded to a halt. Treated as fossils, these bits are extracted and categorized, only to be recollected. Repeating this process adds complexity to the agglomerations, giving order and purpose to happenstance. Reassembled, these bended ossifications are mounted together as self-standing structures with big spans of multi-level heights, interrupted by bridges or accentuated by large canopies. Traces of the operations persist, with the aggregates assigned similar textures, playing on the contrast of the initial materials. Internal views exhibit these confrontations, while views from the top uncover open fields of exploration. Bare and subdued, This regenerated rampant centipede with wings of magnetic foliage evolves into a spatial urban sculpture. Scaled and squirmed to fit in a coastal cityscape, this vision is framed as a rejection of types and typology in favor of framework. Disparate scraps coalesce in substance, consolidated into chromatic blocks that can be read as distinguished entities, or as sections from a bigger mass. A glossary of parts is exhibited, illustrating the characteristics of the scanned individual ingredients of this synthesis, or rather, the post-synthesis condition, of the now distorted, folded and cut pieces. Reedified without cohesive matter, like a protoplanetary formation, they unveil an amalgam of anti-gravitational spaces. This accretion of tori, bended planes and flying ribs form a nebula of reverie, manifesting possible speculations of hyperfuturistic space vessels. Random day-to-day things are shaped and fixed to form identical models presented like samples of loess. These igneous rocks are deducted and scrutinized, self-referential and abstract. The color inversion applied to these images transforms the cavities and graphic depressions into lit extrusions. When coplanar surfaces are rendered obsolete, only the differentiated and villous gain importance. These particularities are treated as curiosities, with their respective logics extracted and reused to confect new sibling forms similar in anatomy and texture. Solely, these artifacts are an ostentatious exercise of space-making. The bidimensional residues of blocks are distorted and given depth. Their uniform surface is now indented and topographic, adapted and able to receive these buildings together, forming a pristine landscape of radical contrast. Molded masses of collected things become drawings of dots that become lines and splatters, and vice versa. This approach is simultaneously retroactive and proactive, eliciting ideas of contextual architecture integration in cyclical time, from ashes to ashes, while promoting deregulated and free-formed terrains, from comic strip to cosmic trip.
Refugee camps, sheltering the displaced, populate the outskirts of cities. These urgent temporary settlements, formed by crude dwellings deprived of proper infrastructure, are problematic in nature. This project attempts to transform this bitter reality by means of isolation and inversion, reinterpreting the compound to expose a potentiality of insulation. A taxonomy of objects is layered over the silhouette of the hovels, such as electric poles, water tanks and other vital systems feeding into the existing island. Beneath this plateau, a graphic reflection of these complex relationships is translated, reformed, to produce a ludic panorama. Sandwiching a midline, these two conditions mirror each other, over and under, above and below, flipped in an alternate ideal. From ascetic to hedonistic, the grey becomes pink and despondency becomes amusement park.
Sketches of whirlpools twisting and whirling fibers and strands become the reactionary imagery, translating public angst and need for protest. Exploring these confused movements of havoc, with a guerrilla attitude, vegetables are mounted and composed to form a centerpiece for riots. This rebel assembly evokes a diagram of volumes, where cabbage, pepper, eggplant and onions are considered for their respective proportions, as segregated containers or protective shells. This morphological operation is balancing between order and anarchy, with an attention to textures and nuances, reducing the components to skin of effect and power, as garment for the insurgent model. Furthermore, the imagined interior is subdivided in meiosis, borrowing from the biological to form a mechanical beast, simultaneously custodian and mutinous, both legume and legend. The unearthing strata of geological formations serves as the point of departure for terraforming. This collection of crust seems to shed light on the differentiated nature of these badlands. Configurations of craters, alluvial soils, heavy indentations and fault zones establish a narrative of formal mimesis. Replicating these organic emergences and topographical phenomena, a series of skeletal structures are manipulated, folded, depressed or inflated. Coated by the same matter, and placed among the lumps, these sculptures blend with their surroundings, indiscernible and weightless. In navigational still shots we see reptilian and tripodal robots cautiously mapping this camouflage territory. One wonders if this additive choreography, where organic and artificial batholiths are seamlessly morphing and merging, is an attempt to render the barren relief fit to occupy, or an iteration of a perpetual and compulsive undertaking to aimlessly shape an architectural layer cake. An epidermal intervention on a facade becomes an architectural exploration in displaying the effect of aggression. A regulum protrudes from the surface of the building, transforming the flat plane into a three-dimensional shield. The punctual fortification holds foggy grids of different opacities, with oval openings like military arrow slits, of different sizes. Undulated matter is grafted around the outlines of existing apertures, further narrowing their visibility from the outside. Distinct pikes with sharp steel heads rupture this outwork, obtruding and threatening. A final layer of pipe systems incorporating vital resources is added to enhance the ornamental camouflage effect of this rampart of complexity. Behind the thickness of this projected anxiety lies an interstitial space of reflection, where, sandwiched between the opposing mirrored skins, one can glance at the sky. Dark and indistinguishable with ease, the sublimated edifice befits a bastion of survival, a prototype adorned by flying doves, as if beatified.
On a land covering a steep hill, a religious domain comprising a convent and a farm is subject to an experimental transposition. First, the architect analyzes the terrain with cartographic precision, locating points of influence in a strategic network of interventions. Then, converted to a virologist with a military eye, the attention is turned to the site constituents. Electric poles, cables, antennas and scaffoldings are scrutinized and transformed. In a revengeful manner, the usually disregarded is reconfigured into onerous vessels that impose heating. Repositioned, these invigorated cyber transplants practice overwatch. The operational diagnosis reaches the constructed heart of the estate, where buildings are treated with the same motif of malicious rearrangement. Amid natural green growth, these organisms of monstrous sophistication are uprooted and weaponized to complete conquest. Here, committed overlays of defensive and menacing obstructions perform like a topographical berm, from which drones embark to fulfill missions beyond the borders of the initial given stretch. The grotesque is utilized as an alibi for creation, to evoke images of hostile takeovers and horrifying strategies of occupation. With combinatory experimentation, the architect turns into an alchemist. The integration of mechanical and electronic components, with feedback, transforms insects into cyborgs. This exoteric transmutation expands the nature of these organisms by increasing their abilities. It reframes prosthetics as an extension of the body, rather than mere replacement. Galvanized into action, they convert into remote-controlled chimeras or autonomous miniature drones. Yet, these manipulations manifest a larger research into complex architectonic systems. Previous bionic augmentations are increased in size, revealing insectile hordes, morphogenetically modified to be inhabitable by humans. As hydroids they can submerge in seas, equipped with decks and periscopes. As aerials, they can swarm over cities, inducing territorial relationships in situ. The architect here returns with a demonstration, from an ingeminated perversion into a magnified upgrade, from scape to scope.
This project delves into the coalescent, in an attempt to assimilate and celebrate viscosity. A photographic analysis of a caramelized toffee block leads to a formal repertoire of detected stains that, once isolated, are categorized to be filtered and reinterpreted as outlandish prospection. Sets of these consolidated three-dimensional traces seem to share anatomical characteristics with myriapods. Elongated, metameric, with numerous leg-bearing segments, antennas or tentacles, these compositions are reminiscent of centipedes, urchins, seahorses, insects and other genera that appear transfixed like patterns in discontinued movement. Assigned a limpid skin that echoes the sticky consistency of the syrup sauce, these derivatives are blended to form different compounds. Views showcase these fusions as lava eruptions and curling collisions, like a journey through progressive ripples led by a troglodyte figure. The traveler is undaunted by these turbulences, as if creating them himself. This wandering protagonist revels in these spectral scenes of morphogenesis, like a hermit in his seclusion, or a deity over a temple. Absorbing the reflections of this immersive setting, the barbed silhouette seems to be complementary to each sequence it traverses, as if summoning space with every step. Hence, the whole is an expansive funnel that concludes in portals, beyond which it perpetually regenerates, transitory and recurring. A space excavation into the ossified tectonic plates of some newly discovered planet reveals an abandoned underworld. Infused with mystery through the use of holographic low-angle shots, this apparent glacier is suspected to be previously inhabited. Plodding through with conventional movement seems to be insufficient. Here, one must climb, glide or crouch on crystallized surfaces, only sidestepping between aimless meditation and fighting monstrous entities, or figments, perhaps. Documented with archaeological precision, these presented cartographies unearth a totemic shelter, structured as an agglomerate of hierarchical sectors of activity. In sequences of transition, spaces are articulated by spherical junctions and accented tunnels. These suspended topographical rifts turn up as events in an otherwise barren cavernous chasm. Floating slabs are barely held by an erratic structure. Almost thawing out, platforms appear to dissolve into one another. A patina work, variably coating the span of a block, drips with pointed icicle formations from each of the levels, like stalactites hanging from the cave's ceiling. It is these molded deposits that extend to support the piling of the planes. Scanned and simplified, this ornamental milfoy is virtually remodeled to decode the object's convoluted logic. Essentially resolved as a binary system of wire meshes, woven coarse surfaces bend, tangle and twist, continuously warping the regular grids of the horizontals. This three-dimensional infiltration results in extensive moving sections, which elucidate many interesting spatial accidents. These episodes, that reflect natural phenomena, are rendered as artificial barrier islands, delimiting fantastical lagoons in a mystical grotto. Here in limbo, the damned meets the pure in duel. A translucent resin block is congealing clots of folded matter and spurts of gel paste into a complex formation of latex foam, similar to an exquisite corpse. Crinkles, cloudy blobs and overlapping tentacles appear harmoniously crumpled. X-rayed features are represented with scribbled segments, vertices and meshes. This formal research allows the isolation of these coagulates beyond the physical model. Changing the materiality of the result induces clever interdependence and divergent associations. Views on a white canvas reveal the scale of the rough carrion, where exaggerated spikes and peaks articulate the cavities with surfaces. From a decaying state to a living setting, this darkly dramatized exoskeleton is transposed onto a new block, a residential one. Upon this wasteland, it violently collides with the facades and bridges the buildings together. Fluctuating between deterioration and enhancement, this scheme attempts to disrupt the suburban experience by suggesting gateways to different realms between reality and science fiction.
A graphic research in mineral formations is a recipe for architectural speculation. Beyond the object, stratified resin matter is carefully dissected, exposing truncated sections of chromatic nuances and microtextures. Splatters and creases form noise patterns and interferences that channel into different readings, allowing new and singular development of space with differentiated cavities. This deployment of thicknesses, in which both accumulated and dynamic energy flows are contained, unwraps a cavernous porosity that has the potential of occupation. Wireframe diagrams of a sculpted single mesh are solidified to represent a ghostly set in the making. Without clear distinction between interior and exterior spaces, these continuous surfaces ostensibly envelop droplets of programs, drenched in white, gold and quicksilver coatings, that attribute preciosity to the airy whole. This delicate gilding of alloy emits reflections that merge the mineral with the organic in a molten fusion, triggering a loss of limits. A topomorphic mirage unveils fleeting images of displaced and misplaced confluences, such as liquefied mountains, frozen deserts, mercurial dunes and vaporous valleys. Unfazed by the dissolution of boundaries, travelers roam this eclectic field of mutation, following a cloud on the horizon, where everything is interpenetrating and in constant state of transfer. These sceneries of entanglement, too refined to be ghastly and hostile, seem to be fit for renegades off to anti-gravitational escapades, in a vast ethereal dreamscape.
In a future where the surface of the Earth is no longer inhabitable, architecture as we know it is obsolete. This hypothesis impels the architect to flee into the deep sea, positing a futuristic venture that could accommodate and ensure the survival of his species. Inspired by microorganisms of the seabed, parameterized nerves and webs emerge like stalagmites from the abyssal plain. Multiplied, this hydrophilic bubble colony acts as a spawning field for embryos anticipating new beginnings. Sheltering from this anoxic environment, merging bulbs create a suitable microclimate in which bean-shaped capsules are tied together, organically resembling a renal system. Sections and views reveal the entrails of these Rossworm-like spatial concoctions, rendered as a complex network of pods, floating within bioluminescent tunics. Motile, with a hierarchy of compact heads to loose flagella, some agglomerates can detach from the coral reef and become planktonic totems that set out on discovery missions coursing for conquest. Assigned natural attributes and mimicking ecosystems, this imagined Ascidian urbanism seems to foreshadow further anthropogenic cataclysms, in the most vast dwelling of the planet, the ocean. Voided shells, shadowy ruins and fissured buildings, or what is left of them, populate this proposed static dystopian world. The familiarity of these fragments evoke a normative diorama, related to our known conventions. Completely destroyed and abandoned, displayed as a backdrop where these collapsed structures now become remnants of loss. Out of the rubble, appear meticulously crafted gizmos, different and detailed, relating part to part within themselves, as memorial mechanics. Their otherness seems to derive from devised principles, technologically advanced and active logics of engagement, yet, their augmented scale is still human. Instrumental, some fetter onto the remains, hovering with assertion. Others maneuver around with contention. Are these operations of rescue, discovery, or colonization? Were they in fact the reason for the outbreak of destruction? As we fail to place them in time, these scenes keep oscillating between improvement and catastrophe. The potent image of the power plant is readdressed in a biomechanical age. Here, the pod leaves the frame and becomes an inhabitable blob. Propelled from its industrial container, the object, on its own, can levitate over the landscape unencumbered by hardware. It forms a transitory living bulb out on a mission. Its interiority, although compartmented, reveals an anti-gravitational space, where the inhabitant himself can circulate freely, guided by his curiosity. The perforations in the shell and protruding oculi imply it is looking outward. This viral station, like a surveillance weapon, is launched from a cylindrical smoke screen, involute, as if birthed by it. Swift, clandestine and stealthy. A viral station presented as a reversed excrescence in an urban fabric, becomes an emblem of survival, tucked in the depth of a contaminated territory. Relying on the aesthetic of prosthetics, with surgical measures of accumulation, molding and merging, this withering outgrowth conceals a series of spaces in disguise, unsuspected from the outside. In fact, this industrial figure is placed into abyss, occupying a voided pit in a desolate train station, undetected. Patella and connectors, splices and bridges, intrinsic to the biomechatronic nature of this hatch, enable survivors to elude epidemics, as a transfer platform, or a base of operations. Beyond the specifics of its functional rationale, this ergonomic body appears to be designed as an added limb, in the foundations of the city.
A carburetor sorts itself out, to mature into an inkling of architecture. Effortlessly stripped from its outer structure, in an act of morphing, the heavy and vapid becomes light and smart, almost liquefied. With a play on scale, all possibilities could be considered: an inhabitable place with different quarters or other bubbles of activity, advanced remote sensing ships, or devices, or even flying self-sufficient alien breeds. Here, you uncannily linger, pottering into infinite strata of layers, between outside and inside. Although identifiable in form, they seem to derive from the same point of conception, where space is cerebral, appearing singular in surface, yet concealing intricate woven strands of intelligence and communication.
At the heart of this city, the clock tower doesn't strike midnight. Hacked and weaponized by its caretaker, an act of piracy from within, the clock tower strikes defiant energies, with centrifugal forces targeting the neighboring government-built belt. This symbolic pole of civic communion becomes a significant pièce de résistance in the fight against the prevailing police state. The eye of the clock conceals a turbine apparatus that launches ligatures, violating the fenestration grids of surrounding establishments, and creating a network of infiltration. These beams, rendered red, are trusses of support and peripheral transfer junctions that proclaim change and repeal. Halted at the construction phase, an incomplete structure stands derelict, neglected and unused in an ever-changing urban context. Intrigued by its presence, yet unable to enter, the architect reads the exterior facade of the built condition, listing the apparent architectonic components. These emerge as the sole tools that enable him to reconstruct the shell, in an attempt to imagine its interior. Through a series of iterations, each visible part is shifted and rotated, multiplied and stacked, reconvened in different relational elucidations to explore different outcomes. The governing rule of this methodology is reflecting the constraint of access, by transforming the hermetic into an open-ended and transparent system. Structural columns and beams are reduced to scaffoldings, walls turn into where artificial intelligence has taken over. Conventional X-rays, documenting the anatomy of a human body today, are issued as outdated and irrelevant in this proposed future. If found by a sentient machina's peculiar registers, could they then be analyzed and assessed? Could a human soma be entirely restituted and understood by using a database of these same documents? The proposal seems to simulate this premise in an AI laboratory, in search for answers. Tomography scans of a skull are treated as structural plans, placed together in chronological succession, based on their different guising characteristics. Color-coded and superimposed, extruded in discrete axes, they start to outline partitions and enclaves, defining volumes of porosity, prone to reassembly. However, when these serial sections are put together in distinct order, they lose their human specificity, and start referring to various organisms. With a balancing act of additive formal reconfiguration and bioengineering, new species emerge. By changing the taxonomy of arrangement, these creatures change in shape, size and function. From monopods, to bipods, to blobs, the alien Frankenstein doctors transcend Earthlings, and depict mechanical drones that align with their culture.
An intervention on an elevator shaft conveys an experience of vertigo. Extruded upwards, the circulation battery bursts out of the residential block it serves, erecting as an autonomous beacon. Once stretched, the claustrophobic box is intersected with chromatic vectors. Upright and tilted translucent beams are ungrounded and multidirectional, in complete contrast with the rigid receptacle they emanate from. Exploded and abstracted, these spheres turn into evasive platforms that hover, with inexplicable lightness. This project is an imaginative catharsis of an aversion to containment. Through this operation of diversion, an introverted irrational fear becomes an extroverted celebration of freedom. Eclectic and elegant.
A shield for riots is designed as an urban installation, meant to receive assaulted civilians and victims of brute force. This vertical street partition can graft onto buildings using brackets that deploy like mechanical arms for stability. A single main wall, equipped with stairs and ladders, acts as a protective facade, concealing first aid stations, pockets of safety and observation decks. This logistical cage can also participate, with subversive tactics, in the confrontations. Blurring the line between mediator and activist, border and watchtower, this instrument of support amplifies the voice of the people, suppressing danger at times, and enhancing their uproar at others. Accelerated scientific and technological progress propels us onto anxious states of constant anticipation, perhaps today more than ever, because whatever or however we define it, the future is now. Recent fields of enterprise towards ontological and ideological changes are of significance, yet, the dismal scaffolding of our being, death, seems to be too empirically grounded to dismiss. For a networked society, where nomadism is the dominant social drive, vessels of death become neo-sarcophaguses, scientized, where conscience and memory are preserved. Ironically, perhaps the hosts themselves died by computerization, but once fitted inside these hulls they are satisfied by trans-spatial voyages. They jump cut between reality and virtuality, between life and afterlife in dual nature. Just like Schrödinger's cat, never condensing into one of its possible statuses.
On the operating table are prosaic objects that were once filled with meaning by the ever-expanding imagination of a curious child, to whom everything is a toy. These objects are scrutinized, maniacally competing for attention, as child play recedes, allowing the architectural experimentation to begin. Decorticated and dismantled, their anatomy is disclosed with decisiveness and accuracy. Once deconstructed, every fragment is again subject to a series of actions: cut, fold, rotate and scale, in a meticulous study of reconfiguration. What is compelling in this patchwork is the lack of hierarchy and economy. Once these items are disassembled, everything is treated equally with every detail providing as many possibilities as the next. These bits are then reassembled to create a self-contained reality in refraction. Scattered and woven over the city, these composites reveal surprising associations between the most incomparable things. Through this poetic ecstasy of small things, from micro to mega, the digital made personal becomes public. A block of debris is presented solitary and singular, as if salvaged from wreckage and recovered for record, as an object of value. As one's eye, fascinated by this sculpture of decay, starts navigating its many textures and colors, filling the cavities with untold stories, one starts to discern familiar artifacts. Melted lead and perforated metal sheets, rusted sanitary pipes and electric cables, are just a few among this amalgam of industrial objects, condensed to form this decrepitude. Not only as intractable as the passage of time but also as arbitrary as the alphabetical order. It all unfolds, in true transformer style, uncovering sentient monopods, unbound rovers and flying mechanical spears, where every piece is shaped, particularly determined and purposeful. The still object of value becomes globe-trotting sentinels of valor, roaming an eerily dim, post-mechanistic junkyard.
With an evolutionary undertaking, a tight framework is disrupted by directional bends that distort the otherwise repetitive columns and rows. These corruptions provoke swellings that inflate the lines much like infective agents leech onto a host, multiplying and in turn, overlapping each other and metastasizing. Iterating this viral parameter of growth reverses the void ratio, completely damaging the consistency of the initial table of cells, injecting it with transformative geometries of expansive free-formed shells. Beyond the matrix, these ever-growing blobs seem to spill past borders, becoming fluctuating data totems. There, luscious structures of fractals conceal meandering tunnels that contract and enlarge, dilute and concentrate in symmetric palliative cohesion, frolicking with ideas of urban densification. This exercise in congestion exorcises pollution. An exhibit of metaphysical equilibrium via devious yet immersive spaces takes us from measurable sprawl to sprawl in the incorporeal. A futuristic weapon of ambush is displayed in this experiment. Similar to a malware in the digital age, materialized, it can infiltrate any war-torn vestige, hacking its structure. Once deployed, the liquefied substance solidifies into intersecting vertices, and smudges of textures that stain a spatial host, transforming it. This territorial avatar relies on mapping systems to create phantasmagoric environments. The siege body generates formation facilities, where the initial space is readapted, as a military staging area or a simulator, in which theories and situations of warfare can be tested and refined, without the need for actual hostilities and casualties, other than architectural. Here, the natural and artificial are inextricably entwined in a model of invasion, to develop new tactics that condition human involvement and performance, by abstraction. From splash camouflage to flash action. This stratagem turns improvised explosive devices into exuberant transplants of refurbishments. Similar to a bone section, an alveolar model inspires an intervention at the core of a residential building. Breaking and replacing slabs with contrasting single surfaces that act like cartilage in a phantom body, this ghost infiltration is designed as an extended tubular volume. The wire mesh bridges through the edifice, from the ground to the roof, ossifying in the middle, becoming its structural spinal cord. At certain levels, this mutated tissue pierces the facade, forming calcified protrusions of alternative scale that redefine the external envelope of the mass. On the inside, visual perspectives unify the space, in all directions. Bits of residual solids from the process hang and animate the crystalline interiors, allowing the hybrid and mystified volute to be traversed and experienced. Navigating through the cavities of this cavernous superspace, transcribes and engrosses visitors in a museographic promenade of spectral proportions. By use of the photocopy machine, the human body is presented and represented, fragmented and mutilated. These visuals intertwine hair with skin, and eyes with torso, and face with feet, with lips and hair and teeth, and nails again and again, in an endless suture of confusion. This provocative dance looks like a celebration of the human figure, but it turns out to be an active research in perverted disembodiment. It places these members in succession, then jump cuts and displaces frames in Baroque fashion, evoking a carnal collage where reconstruction by memory is unlikely, and amnesia, impossible. Treated only as surface, distorted, flattened and reduced to an orgy of textures and waves, organs are reshaped, multiplied and transformed into an interactive corporality to host life from the outside rather than the inside. This free shift in dimensions is utilized once more, with an unhinging yet intriguing rendition. This premise resorts to escapism by means of blasting all familiar aspects, making them float in cosmos, becoming an auto-cannibalistic ritual where the corpus is confronted to the expanding abyss of space. The outbreak of the Civil War left part of the Beirut city center damaged. What remained was a tangle of rusting girders and broken concrete, pocked with bullet holes, dubbed the Egg. One of the last remnants of a lost era, in a completely rebuilt central district. This iconic post-war structure is considered a receptacle of memory that, maintaining its current state and status, overlooks the revived city. Disturbing this relation, the design utilizes a causative process of sketching that deploys itself from the relic. In abstraction, the scribbles seem to outline an angel figure with folded wings, perhaps that of history, which turns its back on the new, and embraces the old. Projected from, yet, attached to the open facade of the eggshell, it creates an enclosure, as if transfixing time in a space of perpetual recollection. With this addition, the architect attempts to transcend the original vocation of the space, from a conventional cinema auditorium, into an immersive VR portal. Such face-off, with similar materiality, roughness and porosity, has an eerie mirroring effect. Uncanny, it becomes an unresolved prosthetic, that feeds on collective emotion. This phantom limb of retention, like a banshee, levitates, but does not alleviate. A neighborhood communal church is subject to an experimentation wherein the invisible is manifested. Like a holographic appearance, almost metaphysical, the floating structure is an aerial replica that overlaps the space of worship, transfigured to be transcended. The intangible essence of devotion is physically interpreted, perhaps reflecting the souls of the pilgrims, in a state of trance. Bridges and pathways disrupt the mass of the blob, hung above praying bodies like an open invitation on a sacred journey towards spiritual realization. Strolling through the belly of the suspended entity, heathens confront their inner psyche, aligned with their divine associations, in new rituals of disbelief. In this spectral investigation of alternative possibilities, the cultural is made cultic, advocating a syncretic future. 64 scribbles of laced arrangements are categorized and listed in chromatic families. Bound together by splutters of translucent matter, they start to attach and knit molecular structures, as if caught in a performance of transmutation. Maintaining their logics of accumulation, they reveal interesting connections of partial assembly. Their construction appears comparable to a biological makeup. One can discern a specific directional anatomy of intent, yet they remain cynical and incomplete. Throughout the process, we can distinguish a genealogy of characteristics, a script that showcases generations out of which the architect designates a queen, This chosen entity is a mothership, assigned for production, leading and protecting the cyber herd. With monitoring functions and impetus flight, this insectobot creates, releases and tracks bitumen-like viral substances. The now tamed 64 drawings can generate 100 conquering synthetic drones. A personal home studio becomes the source and subject of a particular architectural venture. Through sonic orchestration, wherein the effects of echo, reverb and delay are used as influential force parameters of physical morphing, the room is altered, mushed to an inverted mushroom upgraded downwards. Mimicking the produced sound, threads and jolts of particles are shaped and inflated. They expand in ether only to be solidified. With additive modeling manipulations, these forms are mapped, multiplied and scaled to outgrow the capsule they sprung from. Similar to layers in a musical track, they form a coherent entity that, once amplified, envelops its receptacle, unbound and sustained, dismissive of its duration or playtime. Roaming through the unleashed ambient field of frequencies, like released notes oscillating on smooth surfaces and dissipating through intertwined vessels, one can snake and twist in a continuous spatial choreography. This synthesis of architecture and acoustics is a systemic yet poetic search for balance between the tactile and the abstract, like a virtuosic solo after a looping chord progression. A photographic manipulation allows a glimpse of a casual image before it becomes faint, similar to a scroll through the matrix, from virtual to real to virtual again. The glass thickness, blurring the border between exterior and interior, is subject to a reading and intervention in favor of a third condition. This self-portrait, taken from a reflection, is filtered, rendering the lit sections of the image with a dense framework, almost opaque. This glitch in transition affects the underlit sections where dark shadows are partitioned, in haphazard fashion. The regular grid is tessellated by discrepant overlapping honeycomb forms, more transparent, making it the only remaining recognizable part of the original image. The interface cleared, implode to form three-dimensional vertex figures. These asymmetrical cellulations offset inwardly, turning the voids they maintained into solid fills, and vice versa. The results are truncated multi-headed formations resembling crystal clusters. Augmented and stretched, the coated structures appear and disappear with a play of reflections, inhabited by these same reconfigured traces that now drift like drones, in an ethereal, almost hallucinatory atmosphere.
Revisiting Ancient City Vestiges, a series of typological and topological maps, is traced and logged. Ruins of habitats formed by stone walls turn into components, taken apart only to be reconfigured. Through an iterative process, a new script is written, delving into readapted systems. With an allocated pit, a spatial anchor recording the passage of time, the ruins are rotated, mirrored and multiplied. Contingent, this rhizomic process is sustained and intensified, with undiscerned coherence. Analogous to a eulogy of multiplicity, seeming to originate from a do resuscitate order, blown out of proportion. Ritualistic and transcendental, from solid ruins to microconstructs, to metastructures. In a play of role reversal, the architect becomes a surgeon operating on the medical facility itself. The subject of this performance is the equipment that services typical nursing rooms. The adjustable bed, the heart rate monitor and the serum stand, are dismantled and analyzed with a thrilling reinterpretation. Features and fragments are enhanced, scaled, disfigured and regenerated to take part in a theatrical psychodrama, transgressing the stage, the wings and all existing apparatuses, to the rumination and pleasure of the patient's turned audience. The usually hidden cables and functional aid arms are exposed and transfixed. The curtain partitions are solidified blood banks, embedded with new oversized capsules and gizmos. Everything here seems intensively anomalous, sharpened and mollified, desterilized and infectious. Fluctuating between inertia and dementia, this pathological refurnishing of the hospital space makes it almost inhospitable, a nightmarish representation of what would happen if all the undeclared worries and suppressed distress of visiting patients were to be articulated and actualized, purging them and the setting of uneasiness by facing it fearlessly.
I saw it coming. And George knows for a fact that I was apprehending such a misfortune to happen, and it happened. And this is the price to pay when you're a damn Lebanese in 2021.
Yeah, but to tell you the truth, I mean, I know the music is important, but the whole work is very impressive. So I know that you're perfectionist, but
yeah,
still, it was really impressive.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, let's go to the Q&A, and then I have also my own Q&A for you. But go ahead.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you, Samer, so much. This was impressive. This was amazing work to put together, and even to have our students and to have everyone in this part of the world to be exposed to what we can teach in architecture. And myself, I was exposed to such education being in the UK. But I would like to ask you a question with how do you see the future of teaching this experimental architecture in the Middle East, and then the biggest gap that we face when it comes to studying these or pushing the goal of this kind of or this methodology is to push the creativity to the limits, and this is what it does actually. But there's always a gap between going to the maximum or to the full imagination, pushing the creativity, and then just being in, I mean, all of a sudden being in reality. And there is a gap between designing what we have to actually build in real life and then graduating or working on the project in such experimental platform. So how do you actually think about this gap, and how do you try to fill this gap? I mean, there was a joke with I mean, being in these programs that I can have amazing concepts and I can push my creativity, but I don't know how to draw a floor plan, because at the end of the day, there are some basics that you have to be aware of. So where do you see this gap, and how do you think this gap should be filled?
Yeah, I think that there is a double gap in universities, in schools of architecture. And the first one is a mentality gap. I think that, and I always tell my students that beware, your teachers come already from another generation. So there is maybe a 20-year gap between you and them. So there is what I noticed all along those last 15 to 16 years of teaching is that the academy or the school or the university is always tends always to convey certain what they call fundamentals in architecture, architectural fundamentals, what you call the basis or of teaching. But I think that the basis of teaching today has changed. Parameters have changed. We should become, in a way, children of our times. We say in French, enfants du siècle. So we have to acquire a new baggage when it comes to the cognitive baggage, the cultural baggage. We have to appropriate new cultures, to dive into new, what I try to call a syncretic envelope when it comes to cultural to cultural content. And then we have to acquire tooling. I think that we have a double gap, whether in this or that. So what I'm trying to do at Alba is to bridge the gap in a way, even though I cannot hide that there is a certain lack in equipment, in tooling, etc. But I think that the new generation is doing the job. And those brave young people are themselves somehow acquiring things, delving into things, emancipating themselves, reading, researching. So all of this work comes within some kind of a research tendency that doesn't exist in most of the Arab universities. I wouldn't speak only about my school, and I really have in my personal approach, my school is very important because that's where I started in a way, and I want things even to evolve even more. And things are evolving, but the pace is very slow compared to what's happening worldwide. You mentioned the AA or other universities like SAERC or whatever. It is not propaganda for universities or avant-garde schools, but fundamentals to me and somehow to the new generations are different from the fundamentals that we used to learn once we were at school. So that's for one. I really consider this work as being a collector of visions. I think that schools today in the Middle East should acquire new visions, and it is all about a matter of vision. So the lecture is titled METAPORTALS for a good reason, because I really believe that each and every project is a portal by itself. It's a metaphysical portal. And here I would like to maybe add something concerning this dimension, the meta dimension. I think that the meta dimension doesn't exist in architectural teaching. And we tend to direct the students toward a certain problem-solving dimension, to physically anchored dimension, and somehow that's what reduces as well our margin or the opening, the aperture. It limits the opening of the aperture and the horizon. So somehow that's what I have to answer so far. I wouldn't take too long to answer because I tend to spread in time. So you can interrupt me whenever you'd like to. There is a lot to be said. You know, I can bring few clarifications concerning the tripartite taxonomy. Why I chose somehow in my synthetic sum up of this work. And by the way, this work, as I mentioned in the beginning, is dates from 2014 to 2016, and I still have a lot of material, a huge load of material between 2017 and 2021 that is still in the drawers. And this is so unfortunate because the time that you need to archive and filter and treat this material in order to publish it is very important. And unfortunately, we do not have such a luxury. What I'm doing here is really an overstrain compared or in relation to what I do, my engagements at Alba or in my own practice. So to bring few clarifications about the tripartite taxonomy that is very important in this presentation. OMS. It is not, here it is not about a prefixed trinity or a predetermined triad. It is more about a multidimensional foundation, let's say. So instead of talking about fundamentals, I would talk about a multi-dimensional foundation with combinatorial assets. So as you observed all along the presentation, O could have been merged with M or S or maybe other systems that could be taxonomically somehow defined or categorized. So the whole idea is to tackle the notion of speciation in architecture and how space is species as well, like in biogenetics, and there's a certain genealogy of systems, and we've all somehow at school we've all learned about the dominant gene, the recessive gene, etc. So I think that architecture could englobe and combine those genetic dimensions in its own linguistics. That's why, for instance, a spatial entity could incorporate the organic dimension as dominant trait or language, while combining it to some spectral dimension. And here, the spectral notion reconnects with the metaphysical notion. So are linguistics and spatialities disconnected? Not at all. I think that space is language, and language is spatial in a way. So that's why I adopted such nomenclature in connection to those three major natures. And here I would put the word nature in between brackets, or culture, because nature, as you know it, Mother Nature with a big N, with a capital N, the biological. Human is a byproduct of nature. Machine is a byproduct of human, but it is a culture as well. Human is a culture as well. So nature and culture somehow could merge at some point. And why not achieving or reaching the cultural dimension? So from nature to culture to cult. So that's why we were talking previously during the sound check or the rehearsal about religion and politics. They are everywhere, whether we like them or not, whether we want them or not, they are everywhere. But instead of talking about them, I would say, let's talk about a cultural dimension, because a cult, a political cult or a religious cult englobes in a way both politics and religions. So I'm postulating somehow for a syncretic culture, something that goes beyond and above all physicalities in a way, incorporating new types of intelligences. So we have in nature, you have an organic intelligence. Machine is intelligent, but I think that somehow, and this is the mystery of humankind and an existence in a way, the spectral intelligence, we cannot grab a certain spectral intelligence that somehow dominates us, outdominates everything, organic and other typologies of existences. That's it. Again, it could be very long.
I think we were enjoying the answers as much as we enjoyed the presentation itself.
Thank you.
Because we are kind of limited with the time, so I'll have to be very quick with my questions. I do have a question in the Q&A, but before going to the question in Q&A, I have a small part of a question. When we talk about this experimental platform to teach, do you prefer personally to teach them with the sense of having different units with different backgrounds, and the students will be channeled into units? Or do you like to leave it, or do you prefer to leave it open, and then this part of the creativity for the student to choose what to research on? That's the first part of the question. And the second part of the question, we have it here in the Q&A, can the AI design these models to fine-tune the patterns to optimize the results?
Correct. So I'll start with the first question. Talking about the AA, since you graduated from there, there is a system of units, isn't it, over there?
Yes.
So what do you think about this system?
I think I would say I would leave it to you, Samer. I mean, I would like to hear your opinion on this.
All right.
Because,
well,
yeah.
you know, at the end, accessing a certain unit is an option to the student. Huh? You could have, I think, an efficient system could be formed of multiple units that are transversal, that are multidisciplinary, and it is up to the student to access one of those units. In the AA, I think they even submit a portfolio to access a unit, which is very interesting and important, I think, which is maybe not the case in other schools. Having a certain unit that is maybe themed, has a certain research theme, and multiple themes that are really divergent in the frame of the whole school is important and interesting in order to the student to choose at some point which direction maybe he wants to in which direction he wants to research and dive more and more, maybe even beyond a master degree, etc. So yeah, I tend for specialized research units with an optional choice, of those. So you choose where to belong. You choose the dimension to which you want to belong, in a way, or the vision somehow.
Thank you.
Does it answer your question,
yeah.
Mohanad, or was I off the?
Yeah. It relates to the vision of we're trying to maybe teach in the future this experimental themes in the Middle East. So we would have to study, or we have to research on which way to apply them, and which one, I mean, taking from people who taught it already in the Middle East, and to learn from the experiences.
But to answer it, to answer your question fully, I think that you mentioned building at some point. Building is very important, and architecture is as much about building as researching or creating bridges to other disciplines. So I favor more a transversal practice more than something that is exclusively dedicated to architects. So I'm not in the sacrum, I don't know how we say this, in the sacrality of an architectural unit. I'm against it. I'm in favor to infiltrate it with other domains of expertise, with other systems, experts, tools, etc. And if it happens to build, well, let it be. It's something really good. But building just for the sake of building is something very bad. And I think that we should somehow combat it or fight it in universities. So, which is not the case, because a student enters a school, he or she wants a certain degree, okay? We teach them to build, okay? And that stops there. And it's so unfortunate. We do not teach them to think beyond architecture. And I think that architecture happens when we think beyond it.
All right, thank you, Samer. And the other part of the question, because we are very limited in time, so I'm trying to be quick and not to make you stay long here.
I did not read the question.
Yeah.
Okay, so the second, the
AI design these models to fine-tune the patterns to optimize results.
It's starting to happen somehow with the deep learning, the deep dreaming, all of the AI simulations that are starting to induce the architectural discipline in other methods and ways to conceive, or so even the parametric dimension is added to there are softwares that are clearly focused on parameterizing systems and things. But I think that all of those are remain very rationalized. I think that there is a dimension maybe that doesn't exist in software so far, even though I'm a pro software and I'm a pro. I'm trying to understand this relation between physicality and other types of intelligences like the AI thing, but I think that there is this human dimension that should still that maybe couldn't get replaced, I would say.
And we'll
so because at some point it would be suicidal, totally suicidal. So but we're heading towards this. Voila.
All right, and I the rest that I have is just some messages, of course, that reflect the opinion of everyone who attended the lecture today, of how amazing the content was and how beautiful the lecture is. And just one question here about the recording link. We share our recorded webinars on the CRID YouTube channel, so you can always follow and subscribe for the CRID YouTube channel. You will be able to view this webinar and the previous ones that we have. So we keep this going. So you'll always have to invite people to be on board and to give us some talks. I think that would be all from my side. Maybe George, you have questions?
Yes. First, Samer, thank you so much for this presentation. You know, I don't know, the first thing that came to my mind when I see the work is Lebbeus Woods. And you know, and there's a lot of experimental, beautiful images that I saw. I have first a question. All these images, are they generated based on a three-dimensionally constructed objects, or they are just patterns and images?
All right. Yeah, most of them are generated from scratch, okay? In 3D, okay, in the three-dimensional space. Other images, the other part of imagery could be analog, derived from sketchings or other production methods. Others could be involved or induced by analog prototypes, etc. So the 3D printing and CNC milling, etc., have been more required in a later sequence. So I think that you would more seen, and so has been produced from scratch. There are lots of methods that are applied in this imagery production. Yeah.
Okay, why I'm asking you this, because you know, now we also have the opportunity of not only seeing it as 3D through a 2D screen, but now you can also experience using virtual reality itself. Have you experimented with this as well with a student, or not yet?
Once, and it was really very shy as an act. I tried to. I requested a totally fully immersive image, one immersive image. So we tried to apply it once in one of those studios. I think it was the 100 Drones themed studio, and it didn't function fully because for many reasons, I think. One of the reasons being the fact that all of those projects are produced in a 3-week lapse of time. So these projects are very short-term, okay? So you add to this lack of technology, time, etc., and knowledge about those technologies, unfortunately. So, yeah. I know that you are personally induced.
Yes, yes. I mean, the beauty of it, I think, of these type of designs if they're not built, at least you can experience them using virtual reality. And if you have the 3D element, then you can definitely experience. And I think that would be a fantastical experience. You know, personally, from a person who's been doing this for quite some time, I think the level and the maturity in the design that we saw can really be exceptional if you actually experience it using virtual reality itself. So Samer, what is your plan? What is your next plan for this? I mean, I know that you have a lot of work. Do you have any plan to do next?
One of the plans, just to get back, come into one question of Muhannad's. Muhannad said at some point, and it was a very pertinent question at some point when he re-questioned this content in relation to something that could be buildable at some point. One of the targets during this last decade was to bridge those concepts and this imagery into execution, even though it remains academic, an execution drawing or a diploma project. So today at ALBA, there is a real bridging between experimental architecture and a final thesis or a final project. And in a very detailed manner, in a very, I would say, pragmatic and down-to-earth manner. So many of those projects already have become diploma projects. So that's one target I wanted to reach, and I think it has been reached, especially in the 3 to 4 last years. The next target, I really hope that administratively there would be, despite all of those hard and harsh times on universities and schools, there would be a vision to implement even more such a practice. So that is hopefully something that should follow naturally the flow of things. Let us wait and see. Let us wait and see. Another idea or target would be maybe to bridge such a practice to maybe an alternative school, or call it lab, or call it maybe something that could maybe exist within or out of universities that could bridge architecture to cinematics, etc. That is something that interests me as well, while adopting all of those VR technologies that you just mentioned, George, and those I know that it necessitates a lot of budget and lots of wars maybe, but let us see if we get there. It will take, I think, a whole new decade, I think.
So what are you planning to do with that work that you have been doing so far, which you have a lot of documentation for? Do you have a plan for it?
I already published, as you know, 5 books out of those, starting in year 2009-10, I think. 5 publications that ALBA produced within the ALBA system. As I mentioned, METAPORTALS was supposed to be a book. I'm a fetishist of books, by the way. I would always fantasize on having it in one book, but I know that, you know, there were many problems concerning maybe at some point the budget that should be allocated to publications, especially in the latest years. So somehow it refrained me and us and the whole environment. I'm not sure that everyone is conscious about this, but beyond an analog publication, a probable analog publication, I would say everything should is starting to get published naturally and spontaneously online. So students are posting their projects. The school itself promotes as well the best of the selected projects, etc. So Okay, that is regarding publication, but I'm looking forward to the next. I wouldn't like to think that we are stopping publications there. So that's why I try to transgress the analog format into such a virtual presentation in order to accredit and to give the effort back to the students as well, in a way. Because I can tell you that in the academic system, venturing in such a dimension is not very easy, because some of the students tend to choose the safest, the easiest way. So the experimental dimension has always been considered as being the tough road, the hard road, the rough adventure, okay? Fortunately enough, there are many brave people, and they are they have maybe understood that that aligning too much with a certain system could sterilize at some point, that could stop them from evolving and improving themselves. So voila. And by the way, I really would like to give a shout out to my ALBA students. I cannot see how many of them are here, but I think there are a few of them. So,
yes, I'm sure.
So
some portion of it is from ALBA.
Yeah, definitely. So I would really encourage them to keep on delivering a brilliant and tireless work like they've always been achieving so far, despite the insanely generalized state of mayhem that we are all living down here and in the whole world. But here in Lebanon, it's a triple or quadruple portion. So that's one thank you, and another thank you goes maybe to my collaborators, because I have to mention that this work has been done in collaboration with some other professionals. So there is Rami Mor, who was all of the credits have been mentioned clearly in my presentation concerning the meta-narratives done by Rami Mor, the preamble done by Shahid Aouri, and other maybe articles or complementary acts done by Grégory Tausson. Sami Dakash as well, of course, he was there to all along the teaching and the production, the filtering, etc., in the production process, and all the follow-up he did with the students at some point. I really hope I did not forget anyone, but I think here we are. Yeah, I really thank them all for their precious, personal, precious input.
And Samer, talking about collaboration, I'm sure, you know, after this we will collaborate in a way or another. So I will reach out to you again to do, you know, some collaboration with the center, and then maybe with both universities or things like that. So I'm sure, you know, you didn't hear the last from me. So I will reach out to you again for that.
Thank you, George.
So
thank you, George. And it would be more than a pleasure. And allow me to thank you once again for the invitation, the smooth follow-up, and the wonderful hosting, George, Mohannad. I really hope we will be able to have many other intersections in the near future.
I mean, that was an absolute pleasure. Samer, any last message you would like to say to the audience?
And it will maybe bring memories to you, George. And it's one simple extract or sentence or phrase that our common Alba teacher, ex-Alba teacher, Guvder, you knew Guvder like I knew him. It was a quote. He was already always quoting a certain philosopher called Kierkegaard. This quote was about always choosing the toughest path. So in French, it says, ce n'est pas le chemin qui est difficile. It's not the road that is hard, but it is the hardness or the tough that is the road. So maybe it would be a last something to close with this whole session in homage to Guvder as well.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Samer. Thank you, George, and thanks, Samer. And mentioning the final project, we also do have some really interesting projects in the American University in Dubai. Maybe we would like to invite you to take your opinion on our projects also from our students. That would be a pleasure to have you with us. At the end, I would like to thank you again, Samer, for interesting and for accepting the invitation and for the interesting presentation. I'd like to thank everyone else who joined. Thank you, George. Thank you, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next webinar. Thank you, everyone.
You too. Ciao. Bye.